Welcome, everybody. My name's Nicola Morris, and I'm the project manager for the Community Land Trust Network. Going to start with a little introduction of what do we see today, what are our aims of today. We're going to talk about what the Growth Lab is, where it's come from, and what it's trying to achieve, and some of the service design ideas behind that. And we're lucky to have Steve Lee with us today as the service designer who's worked on this. We're going to look at presentations from the 3 growth teams that we've worked with over the last year, with them taking you through their journey, identifying the opportunities they saw, the challenges, and where they see their organisations going. Then we'll have some learning and feedback about the process and what we think the outcomes have been achieved, and talk about some of the connections and positives that we've got from the Growth Lab. So, as I said, we'll be looking, Tom Chance will be looking at the history and the future of the Growth Lab. Owen Jarvis will be talking about service design. Then we're going to move on to the 3 organisations. Apologies, Can, I've missed one of your C's. It's CCAN. So we've got Can, We Can Make, and Middlemarch. Please start preparing your questions, because we do hope to have a really sort of like active 10 minutes after each presentation, question and answer. Once the presentations are complete, we'll have some short reflections and close. We'll have done a lot of talking at you. Hopefully you'll talk back in the question and answer, but then we'll move to breakout rooms for a further sort of like discussion before we close the session at 12:30. So just introducing the team, I've introduced myself. Many of you will know Tom Chance, Chief Executive of the Community Land Trust, Owen Jarvis, Chief Executive of the Co-Housing Network, and also to highlight Steve Lee's with us from Steve Lee Design, who's been the service design lead on this project. And the 3 teams at the top here, as I've said, is Communities Can, Middlemarch, and We Can Make. Oh, that's gone too far. Sorry. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If everybody can keep your microphones off, it may help sometimes with your internet to have your cameras off, but if possible, could you have your cameras on? As you notice, we are recording this session. If you don't wish to be recorded, please turn your camera off. Please use the chat for any questions, any problems. Also, my colleague Josie will be sharing in the chat a link to a Jamboard where you can put all your ideas and comments. The Jamboard has a page for each of the teams, also for General Growth Lab, and also several other pages in case you haven't got enough room to get it on the Jamboard. So please use that, please use the chat. I think I'm now going to stop sharing and pass on to Tom. I'm going to say I'm going to stop sharing. For Tom to introduce the Growth Lab.
Thanks, Nicola. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes. There'll be lots of theory, I'm afraid. I'm going to skip through this, and you can come back to this presentation afterwards if you want to take a bit more time on it. And there's other stuff we've written that we can share to help explain some of the thinking. The programme was delivered by the Community Land Trust Network and the Co-Housing Network, working together with the 3 teams that I've mentioned, and were funded by the Loudest Foundation through a grant to the European Community Land Trust Network. And we're hoping to expand this approach across other parts of Europe as well as within the UK. And it starts with the question of how do we achieve greater scale for community-led housing? And this is a diagram you may have come across, something called the 3 horizons model of systems change. The idea being the red line is the normal way of doing housing that doesn't give any agency to communities. The blue line, innovation, is what we're doing. And the hope is to grow that innovation to a point where it exceeds even the scale of the existing system and eventually leads to the green line, the viable future, the kind of new way of working. And it's a way of thinking about real scale. And a lot of our work is still supporting many individual pioneers doing innovative things. And we're not coming at this saying, this is the only thing we're interested in, but how do you achieve scale is the question we're trying to grapple with. How do we get here? Well, there's lots of stuff before 2017, but between 2017 and 2021, there was a significant amount of money coming into the sector from government, from Power to Change, from the Nationwide Foundation, from others, to try to grow the sector. And in 2022, we published a green paper and then did a big collaborative review process with many of you in the room probably involved in that, to say, well, what have we learned from all of that about the impact of that period of funding and growth? That program from 2017 was based around a theory of change that starts everything with a group. Find a group of people who want to do something together, either for themselves or for their local community, and help them figure out how to create a project that either will 6 years later, maybe a bit longer, sometimes shorter, lots of joy and excitement, celebration, people moving into homes, something's completed. And we know that there are many, many hurdles on the way to achieving that. And so how do we overcome them all? And so people lack expertise, so let's train up advisors and provide support hubs and so on, so groups have somewhere to go for help. Land is very expensive or difficult to get hold of, so let's try to persuade councils to dispose of sites and so on. And if we can overcome all those different barriers around land, finance, skill, then we can help groups to succeed. The problem with this, it rests on certain assumptions that we've realized have really limited its ability to scale. One is that it always assumes it's bottom up, and it's centering the whole thing around taking a local group and without regard to what their chances are of succeeding and potentially wanting to do something that is essentially extremely difficult in a market that is not designed around them at all. We've got a lot of projects that really have limited chances for success, and we're not necessarily focusing on where there's a greater chance of success. It's been very dependent on grants, and while we've had a lot of success collectively in getting grants out of some of those organizations I mentioned, it's very hard to get that consistently over the 6 or more years. So we get lots of stop-start programs, projects benefiting when they're in the right place at the right time, others just getting stuck. There are many hidden foundations on which the successful projects depend. There might have been a one-off grant or a council that for a period of time was willing to give a piece of land that it's not going to repeat, or really heroic individuals. Many of you on the call, I would call these heroic individuals that, yeah, you can find some of them, but they're not in every community, and it kind of reinforces privilege in the system by requiring that people have the capacity and skills and social capital to do these projects. And the approach doesn't lead to any systemic change because each project solves problems in its own way. Those don't lead to any changing of the features of the system, like public policy, practices within the system, flows of resources, relationships within the system, in order to make this happen at a greater scale. One person's success doesn't open up opportunity for others necessarily. And so what we see is this sort of teal line just bumping along, like, up and down, moments of success, lots to celebrate, lots being achieved, but it's not really leading to a significant change in scale or any kind of change to the overall system. And it remains the case, years after all this effort, that for most places, the private sector, housing associations and councils are doing all the development. They're the people in charge of the system, and we're out on the margin somewhere. And so the idea that you can achieve scale by a strategy that is take groups, figure out bespoke solutions to them, and then deliver projects is not really viable. And what it leads to is lots of struggle, stop, start, and so on. And loads of success. I want to emphasize, we still are very, we want to celebrate and love all the many things that manage to get achieved, but it's not really achieving much significant scale in comparison to the appetite that we know is out there, the need, the injustices, and so on. So we say, well, let's turn this around and look at this problem from from the other end of the telescope. Start with the problem, find a recurring, frequently occurring market opportunity or challenge. Like there's an issue with affordability in rural communities that aren't getting enough housing built, or there is an issue with empty properties in high streets in the northeast that isn't getting any attention. where there's a strong motivation for the communities to solve it and a strong motivation for the key stakeholders you need on board to solve it. So you then got an opportunity, which is a significant market, trying to develop a relatively standard product that can deliver that in a way that solves the problems in a repeatable way. So it's not each time you need to find a new bespoke solution to where you find the land, or how you get the finance, or how you get a planning consent. You're using the same solution each time, and you've developed a service that can bring together the relevant partners to make that happen again and again and again. And if you can get that combination of the right problem and the right product and service, you can get replication, you can get scale. That's the theory. So a lot of that thinking was done in that period from 2022, and we've continued to think this. And this is really like joint work between ourselves and the CLT network and the co-housing network, thinking about this. And that work led to the development of the Growth Lab, which Owen's going to explain, and also a long-term strategy, which we discussed with the Housing Minister last September, on which the Department Levelling Up and Housing Communities is continuing to work on, which then thinks about, well, how do we get that kind of thinking? How do we get the capacity to do that at great scale? And it all boils down to the question for our sector, which was articulated back in 2022, of what new leadership skills, replicable and marketable products and services will really make this happen. And so the Growth Lab came out of us thinking, well, what could we do to try to answer that question? How could we work with some real innovators in our sector to help them to try to figure out some answers to that question, to find approaches to community-led development that have more potential to roll out at scale. So over to Owen to talk about the design.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Let me just share my screen. So hopefully that's showing up. Yeah, I'll just provide a little bit of background and description to, so you heard a really good account of the theory and the thinking that's evolved over quite a while in terms of developing the program. But I just wanted to give a bit of background and description to the actual program itself. So from a co-housing perspective, just to use an example that's a good example of what Tom was talking about, it's quite tempting to maybe look at success stories if you're looking to scale. So this is New Ground Co-housing in London, North Barnet, and they've just won the World Habitat Awards, celebrating their 6th birthday. Extremely successful project, formerly known as the Older Women's Co-housing Project. And last time I was around there were 2 different film crews there. They've had huge exposure online, and the chair of the task force for older people's housing was visiting as well. So you can't really get more sort of celebration and attention on a particular project, but focusing on a successful project in its own right hasn't really helped in terms of replication. So as Tom was suggesting, we're really looking to take a step back and to focus a little bit more on the problems being addressed in the round and the products and services that can be developed that can lead to replication, with an understanding of the system that we're working in, and trying to identify where we can partners who can actually help many of our innovators to scale up. So it's taking sort of a step back. So in order to do that, we felt we needed a fresh approach to supporting innovative entrepreneurial folk in our sector to grow and develop. So we were looking for teams coming from 3 different stages, if you like. So it might be that there's a concept that's come out of research or insights that have been developed over time. And actually, we might take the opportunity to back an entrepreneurial research team to take what is an early stage concept and develop it into something that can be launched. The second scenario is where we have a project or development that is in its early stages. It's been replicated, tried and tested in at least 1 location. You can see that there's opportunity within the market for growth and replication, and we want to get behind that to help that team get to the next level. And the third example is where we've got a mature team and offer that's been replicated many times and has the opportunity to maybe move across regions and possibly nationally. So what are we offering the teams? We'll come on to this in a moment, but new tools and a design process to help think about the opportunity a little bit differently. And we'll come on to the double diamond and why we've chosen that, but also a community of practice. So not just having one team on its own, but a collection of teams all working on different projects and problems, but able to share support and insights and the experience of going on that journey together. We included challenge sessions. So during the program, teams could be coached and challenged by representatives of our own teams, but also business consultants and third parties where we could find people with specialist skills and to add to the mix. And of course, importantly, freeing up the time from business as usual, from the day job. So we're offering teams a grant, unless they already had one to work on such a project, to take time out of the day-to-day to really dedicate on developing their offers. So the methodology we've been working on, particularly with help, as Nicola was mentioning, from Steve Lee, a very experienced service designer, was to look at using the double diamond as our structure, our framework for the program. And the great thing about Double Diamond is it's celebrating 20 years. It's past 20 years of being conceived and developed. And it's tried and tested by all sorts of teams, from public services to large commercial organizations and startups alike. So it's got the best of both worlds of being tried and tested in industry, but also being new and fresh to the community-led housing sector. And as you'll see from the diagram, it has 4 basic stages within 2 diamonds. The first section is about really exploring a problem and trying to understand the context, the users, and what's needed, and then to focus down so that you can develop an informed brief, a problem definition, if you like, which then leads into the second stage, which is where our teams would be creating new ideas and solutions, and then testing them, prototyping them, testing them, so that by the end of the program, they have either a new product, service, solution, or growth strategy that they feel has a good chance of success. This gives you a little bit more detail about the program, and you can see that we added an additional smaller diamond at the beginning of the program, just to help teams to refresh and review what they were doing, their vision and their mission, so that they came into the program with a new plan. Even if they were very experienced and used to what they were doing, it's a chance to refresh what they were looking at for the program. We divided the program into 3 workshops to reflect the different stages of the process. And each of the workshops was introducing new tools, new methods that the team could then apply between workshops, and then feedback and tell us their progress and results when they came back. And you can see it. So it's quite a rigorous, structured program that teams can adapt and use in the way that they need to for their challenge. And this is another slide. Some of these images are taken from Steve Lee's own projects, but these just give a sense of there are many different ways, many different tools and methods you can use to test out a problem, to get your insights. And then importantly, and perhaps the biggest challenge that many teams face, is actually taking it out to real people in real situations and meeting your users, your stakeholders, representatives of local authorities, to test out whether solutions are going to work in practice. And this diagram gives a sense of what the actual experience is. A large part, I would say, is about coping with discomfort during the program, because it can often feel very messy, particularly in the early stages. But by sticking with the process, sticking with a program, you're able to come through to clarity and a clearer offer by the end of the program. And this then gives you a sense of the 6 months journey that our teams have been on, the different stages, points in the journey, different activities in terms of research, coaching. And I think the key thing to take away from this, although it is a 6 months program, it's not a journey that ends with the program. You probably hear from the teams that they've been busy going on to the next stages of growing their offers of seeking funding, investing, of seeking opportunities to test out what they're doing. And it's not uncommon in business startup accelerator programs for teams to leave one incubator or accelerator and move on to another one. So I think that the thing is, this is a launch pad to the next stage of development. It's not the end of the matter in itself. So with that, yeah, happy to hand back and actually hear from the teams themselves. Let me just stop sharing. So great.
Thank you very much, Owen. And now, if I can call up the CAN team to provide their presentation. I believe it's Hilary Anson from the Rural Development Centre who will be presenting. So if I can hand over to you, could you share, please? Hilary will be talking for 10 minutes and then we'll come back to the sort of like main screen and have some question and answers for the team.
Can you see that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Morning, everybody. So during the Growth Lab, we set out to address the issue of vacant properties on the high street and how they might be converted into residential to support the regeneration of the North East. And the reason for this choice was that Northumberland had several good examples of these types of development compared to County Durham. And the journey really began by building on the key reasons for the success in Northumberland and the challenges they faced. Our team consisted of 3 organisations who brought different skills to the mix. So there was Andy and Tom from Communities Can, who are the lead community-led housing specialists covering 7 local authorities in the North East. There was Susan from Durham Community Action, a partner covering County Durham region, and there was Nick and myself from the Rural Design Centre who covered the innovation activities. Owen mentioned there the Design Council's tried and tested double diamond framework, and that's something we're very familiar with and work with on a regular basis in innovation. And from this model, we identified that we really wanted to shift the focus of enablers from a passive voice to a proactive service. And by creating an appetite for development among community groups and local authorities and other parties, we ultimately wanted to decrease the average timescale of development, which we know is about 10 years. We intended to develop an upfront financial diagnostic tool which helped people realise the payback periods of buying and developing a building. And we'd like to incorporate an AI technology such as a visualisation tool to potentially feed into the local demographic data as well with that. And once completed, and when there was a simple report, say, generated, the enabler or the community group could then go and work to secure Section 106 or other funds. And you've just seen the framework there. So our plan was to test the tool initially with key stakeholders in Stanley, County Durham, which is an area of very high unemployment and low skills compared to the rest of the country. And then we wanted to extend out to a range of established partners across the North East, which we're deeply rooted with. And then Susan and Tom wanted to present the findings to other groups in the CLT and the ACRE networks after that. I think the opportunities from the Growth Lab has allowed us to realise and develop initial body of research which is enabling us really to search for further funding. We did apply for the 100,000 grant through the North East Digital Launchpad to create a minimal viable product. And whilst we did receive very positive feedback from that, we were unsuccessful in the bid, unfortunately. The feedback suggested that we needed a detailed market analysis and financial planning of the product. And we will continue to look for opportunities to develop our ideas further. We just didn't have that time to take it forward to that level of detail, unfortunately. I think the Growth Lab has also allowed us to meet with various specialists from across the country to seek advice on our development journey. And most recently, we've spoken to Alex Johnsel of Wessel, which is an organisation who supports disabled people to live the life they choose in Bristol. And he's designed an app to help people with PIP payments. And he's really given us some very useful technical advice, particularly around licensing of existing models, which they found their model in New Zealand and adapted it to the UK. So that's something that we feel that we'd like to start researching. The tool also has been a point of conversation with wider agencies to start engaging with communities around regeneration and retrofit on the high street. So we do a lot of work with Moby, the educational charity of George Clark, the architect. And we've also started having conversations with Carbon, who are very much Carbon Homes, who are very much invested in the regeneration of Stanley Front Street. We've also presented our ideas and we've sought feedback within the community-led housing local authority operations meetings. That's the 7 local authorities within the North East. And we've chatted to digital specialists such as Wayne Bryant, who's in the North of Town cluster, to shape our ideas. Although we see that this has got huge potential for the wider sector, we don't feel like we can accurately comment on that at the moment until we shape it further. I think the major hurdle for us at the moment is we do feel like we're in a bit of a catch-22 situation, because we can't get the developer involved at this stage. It's obviously, to get a developer involved costs loads of money, and I think people are cautious not to put that money down until we have further research. So there's the question, how do we get a minimal viable product? I think we are going to have to test it on paper, which isn't ideal at the moment. But then this idea of potentially looking for a similar product would be advantageous, I think. And I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but this is a very basic scope and document that we've put together of what we think is going to happen next. So we are looking to secure, we've realised, smaller funds to conduct the development and the further testing of our phases. I think our aims are initially to find the users and the target consumer, which we believe are the enablers, the community development officers and the local authorities. And we'd like to test this approach ideally over 12 months to get the full picture within our existing communities to see if it gains traction. As I mentioned, I think we're going to have to test it on, apologies, that's my doorbell there. We are going to have to test it on paper at this stage to understand the costs associated with the service. And we will identify the most appropriate platform for the service, whether it be an app or a website, because we know that will have a significant cost influence and also be different for the users who are involved in it. We do plan to conduct a full market analysis in order to provide solid evidence for future funding bids and to take it to a digital stage. And we'll also look at how our service differs to any viability services already used within various authorities. Although we are confident that we are offering something complementary, and that our model is very much at the very first stage of the process. And I think at this stage we are making the assumption that the beneficiary is the community group and that the tool will help start to speed up their development journey. But we're open to that too and testing that. And we're also assuming that the data in our tool will be easily adapted to suit the various scenarios across the UK when we come to scale it up. I think at the end of the process, we do feel confident that we'll have a more accurate picture of the costs involved and assume that one of our 3 organisations will initially be the owner and the manager of the product. And my screen has frozen, but it was just to say thanks very much for listening, and to say thank you very much to the Community Land Trust team for their support through the Growth Lab. And it's been really beneficial for us. Thanks very much.
Right, if I can ask you to stop sharing, and we can go back to the general screen, and just open up for any questions that people might have, or any of the CAN team. So we can do this on show of hands, or just unmute yourself and come forward with your question. Well, I'll come forward with a question in that. Oh, has anyone got their hands up?
Hilary, sorry. Got Hilary and Phil.
I mean, I was holding back, so I don't mind going the other way around, but I'll tell you what my question is and then you bring it in. Because I'm very interested in high street, but do you know, in terms of local economy and land values, I would imagine that our difficulties on our high street in Arundel, Chocolate Box, West Arundel, are very, very different from what the other Hilary's been describing. So, and all this stuff is completely new to me, all Tom's introduction and, you know, the other chat. So it's almost some kind of orientation about what does this sampler project mean in this hugely different environment. And you can answer that at the level of, you know, sort of Tom and the service divine, you know, what are these growth labs about relative to such different experience conditions?
It's a really tricky one, actually. I think we would like to test it in similar areas first. But actually chatting to the guy from Wessel yesterday, Alex Johnson, he said he's in Bristol, and he says it's very difficult to get properties on that council properties, authority properties for buildings and things like that. So he actually thought it would be advantageous to have this tool, because it would be more of an opportunity to find particularly empty buildings on high streets. But yes, appreciate the technical bit. That is going to be the challenge, is adapting it when it comes to that part of the model. But hopefully, I think we've got an appreciation of how we can do it.
Yeah, and just for Hilary Knight there, a bit of a background is that this viability tool will only give an initial costing, then further more specific costs will need to be done. This is just a standard or an industry average that we're intending to come up with that would kind of enable the groups to see whether the project was financially viable or not, which at the moment we do. But it's all paper-based, and it takes a huge amount of time, which slows the whole project down.
If I could just answer on the theory level before we go over to Phil, just to add to what Hilary and Susan have said. And Hilary, it's a really great question, and it really helps to illustrate this difference between, oh, that's a nice, interesting project that's happened in Stanley in County Durham. How could we do that in Arundel? And instead saying, well, I mean, is the problem the same? I presume it's not. The problems you'd be addressing with high streets in Sussex and the interests of the local authorities and everyone else would be so different. So you might sort of borrow some elements of what Hilary and Susan and co have done in the Northeast, and you might borrow some elements from some other things as well, but you'd be coming at it from a different starting point. So if one were to, you or like Action Rural Sussex or someone were to sort of go through the Growth Lab, you would go back to that discovery phase and you'd be testing all these assumptions. You wouldn't just be saying, oh, how can we replicate what they've done here, there, here.
I've just got one question for the team. Is quite a lot of organisations now operating in two-tier sort of authority situations. How much contact have you had with your new combined authority? and how much contact have you had at the lower local authority level?
I'm happy to take this one. We've been in touch with the North of Tyne Combined Authority, and they have came to one of the presentations that we've done, and they put us in touch with the digital team, which helped us approach the launch pad for a grant, which was great. Durham will be part of that North of Tyne Combined Authority from May, so that's also useful. In addition to that, myself and Tom from Communities Can, we run a local authorities operationals meeting for community-led housing, which is fairly quiet at the moment, I have to say, but we do still get representatives from 4 or 5 of the areas that we represent. And we've given them the presentation, we've shared the ideas and got some fairly good feedback, because they could potentially, we were looking at, they might be one of our customers. And the concept I used as a community development officer was that they pay for funding advice and these funding tools and websites all the time. So if there was a little app that they could pay for that enabled community groups to just check out the financial viability of a project, then that would be like quite a cost-effective way of speeding the whole process up, because I have to do that all manually at the moment. So there has been quite a lot of discussion at local authority level, and nobody's put their hand in the pocket yet, disappointingly. But I guess it's because the product isn't a product yet. It's still being investigated and thought about.
I noticed Robin just asked a question about the timeline there. So initially, Robin, we're going to, if we had secured the 100 grand, we were going to try and develop, well, I say try, we're going to have a minimal viable product within a year. I think ideally what we'd like to do at this stage, it's all dependent on when the funding's there and the parameters of it. I chatting to Alex yesterday, he said his app took him 2 years. And that is using a licensed, established framework. Our expectations is to produce a minimal viable product within a year, but also to do some of the preliminary market research, which I've said a year to be on safe ground there, but I think 6 months to a year. Ideally, we see a minimal viable product within 2 years maximum, I would say.
My question was just to sort of understand a bit more what the product would do, but is that something that's still under development, or is it?
No, yeah, Phil, I think we did a presentation before that had a lot more detail in, but we'd scaled it down for time limits today, because when I was listening to the presentation, I did think, oh, I haven't really explained what it's going to do. At the minute, my role as a community-led housing enabler is to wait for groups to come to me and say they've got a lovely idea, and then I'll help them. This idea is that I know there's groups out there in County Durham that could and should be doing community-led housing. There's a need for it, and they've got the capability to do it, but it's not on the radar. What I would like to do is to be able to knock on the door and say, do you know that building down your road? It's for sale for this amount of money, and it would cost you this amount of money to do it up. And you could borrow this and you could get a grant for this. And in so many years' time, you'd get a return on your investment and your work, and you're meeting the social needs. So I wanted something that would speed up the process that I currently do, paper-based, manually. I'm not the greatest with a spreadsheet, so it takes an awful lot of time. There's a lot of room for error. And I wanted that paper-based system to go into an app so that it could be done fairly quickly. We described it like moneysupermarket.com. You go on the app and you put your wages in. This is very simplistic description of it, but because of time, I'm describing it like the Money Supermarket app. Can you get an app? Can you not? Can you get a mortgage? Can you not? And you literally put in a few taps of and the data would come out the other end. That's ideally what we're hoping for. We've talked to developers that do seem to think that that's possible. And it's certainly something that I would use that would be more proactive, because I could go like a salesman, door knocking, go around and introduce the idea of community-led housing, maybe with some visuals, certainly with some financial information, which is the first question everybody asks. And that would just speed up my time and raise the possibility of what is possible, you know, quicker than the current slow method that I'm using.
So it's primarily a viability calculator.
Yes.
I just wondered whether you talked to Pammin, because they did all the work for the community-led housing. They set up a separate model.
We've never come across.
Pammin, I think it's M3 or 3M is the company. But they did some work through the CLT network and co-housing, didn't they? Or CCH, and developed a viability model specifically for community-led housing. Right.
It's never been mentioned before. And we've talked to a lot of people, so I don't know if it's still around or in existence.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they do big RP viability model stuff, but they may well.
Right. Yes, there are models that already do that, Phil. And our local authority said that if we took a project where we'd already done a lot of work on it, they would run it through their viability system.
Yeah.
However, this is like much further back down the road.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? This is just when you go out to your trustee board and you raise the possibility with them that community-led housing, there's this building, there's these costs. It's at that level. It's not intended to be specific enough that it's a starter level pack, if you see what I mean, before you would go into the larger systems that the RPs that we recognise and local authorities are using. Yeah, but thank you, and it'll be worth looking at because we always.
Sorry, we just come in. Yes, we have a direct experience of Panwin. Very complex, very long, very difficult to work through. What we're looking at is something as Susan's described, but I think it's also important to emphasise the visualisation part of it, which is Hilary mentioned AI as part of it. It's actually about not just looking at how the numbers work much more easily and quickly, but actually what it might look like as well, all as part of the same thing. So, and we've got a lot of people, I think, very excited about it when we describe it fully, including combined authorities. So just back to that point earlier, the existing North Tyne Combined Authority are really bought into us as an organisation and actually what we're trying to do, and we hope that'll be the same when we get the new expanded North East Combined Authority later this year. In May. I think just come back to the original point as well, whilst the North East is very different to Sussex, clearly, it's very varied. So actually, in terms of this kind of scenarios that there are to test these things, they are very varied. So it's not just looking at something that is in, in particular types of neighbourhoods. It's potentially viable. What we want to do is look at that across different sorts of communities, both urban and rural. So just thought I'd make those points. Thanks.
That's great. We come to the end of our question and answer session. I can see in the chat there's loads and loads of connections already happening, and we're getting a lot of collaboration, so that's great. Now, if I could ask Melissa from We Can Make to share her screen and to tell us about the work that they've been undertaking in Bristol and then reaching out across England and Wales. Okay, thank you, Melissa.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone see that? Is it all working? Brilliant. Cool. So I'm Melissa Mean from We Can Make in Bristol, and we are a community land trust with a small micro factory where we use modern methods of construction and biomaterials to make our homes. We like to describe ourselves as a kind of neighbourhood test space. So we're trying to imagine and make homes and neighbourhoods that create social infrastructure and community wealth. So the kind of shifts and the kind of like the way we kind of approach this idea of kind of scalable models, I think we're kind of interested in a couple of kind of key kind of shifts. So rather than kind of working house by house or unit by unit, we're really interested in the neighbourhood as a key unit of change and scale, because we think that's a really good human scale, scale to be working at. So that's where our focus is. We find a kind of housing and how it's treated is quite siloed and separated from health and economics and transport and energy, and we're trying to unsilo things and really trying to bring kind of collaboration between council, community and others together. And then thirdly, we're really trying to kind of that housing isn't just about creating a financial product to be traded, but it is trying to see homes as social infrastructure and how homes can help us kind of live well and better together. So those, as we approach this kind of like growth and scaling process, this is kind of like the ideas and ethos that we're trying to bring to things. And so thinking about the neighbourhood that we're based in, so we can make us based in Knoll West, which is a 100-year-old council-built estate. And I think, the conventional approach to housing, which we get repeatedly by developers coming to our neighbourhood and going, oh, there's lots of nice green space, why don't we build on that? Or looks at our kind of, slightly under-maintained housing stock and go, well, let's just demolish that and start again. And believe me, we've had repeated attempts to do that by various developers and even the council sometimes as well. But we see that as an absolute kind of the wrong approach and a wasteful approach. It wastes the nature and that green space. It wastes the embodied carbon of kind of demolishing those homes and starting again. And it also wastes the social capital of, we know, what a brilliant community and the know-how and resources that they have. So our starting point was really trying to think about housing delivery from a different perspective, from the perspective of community and the assets and know-how that we've got there. And I think if we can tap into that, what we find that there is a real kind of rich hidden abundance there. So it's a really low density estate. And what we've identified is there's lots of small sites scattered among big back gardens and in between buildings where you could put homes exactly where they're needed most. So it's kind of houses like this. So this is a situation where it's an elder who's lived in Knoll West for 30 plus years. And this is the side of her garden. She would love to downsize, but the only offer that she's had is like a kind of 1-bed flat on the other side of Bristol, away from her social kind of networks. But what would be amazing to do is make her a single-story accessible home in her back garden, and then that would release this council house for a new family to come in. And what we found is there's over 1,000 kind of such kind of little spots just across our neighbourhood. And it's kind of like almost like development, like urban acupuncture. So you're putting in the homes exactly where they're needed most. Highlighted on this map is just the top 150 most viable kind of sites, microsites like this. So we've delivered 2 homes like this so far. So this is Tony and her daughter Amancia, and they were staying in the spare bedroom of her parents' council home. Possibly some family tensions there. But what they did have was a large back garden here. So we co-designed with her family, with the neighbours, a suitable home for her. And then this is Tony in our little micro factory actually making the cassettes for the walls for her home. And then what happens here is the land is taken out of the council tenancy, is returned to the council, and then the council puts it into our community land trust. And then we borrow the money, and then affordable housing grant, a combination of that, we're able to build the home and create a permanently affordable home. So this land assembly and planning process is a new way to assemble land that is exclusively for community-led. So planning and land assembly is conditional on the home and land being in community ownership and affordable in perpetuity. So this, unlocks a new supply of land, which is exciting. The second kind of site that we're kind of working on is the next scale up, which is kind of garage and car park sites, typically being able to accommodate between 4 and kind of 12 homes. And again, there is this hidden abundance of these kind of sites scattered across kind of neighborhoods. And what we're developing here is a kind of community prototyping of kind of small sites up to kind of 3, possibly 4 stories, where you can have multi-occupancy flats provided for people. And this is us on one of the sites doing some one-to-one community prototyping with members of the community. And what we're developing is a kind of kit of parts approach. So a system that can be almost pre-approved in terms of building control, fire, warranties that you can then repeat across these small sites. Again, making it much easier to unlock these sites because you've got a repeat process and costs and supply chain are much more certain. So you can see it's the same system, kit of parts, and we're testing it against 3 sites. And then you can also have a kind of universal cladding system, so you can really make it a match up to the local context and personalize it in that way, which is great. So, you know, if you add up the kind of microsites and small sites together, this is a really kind of powerful new supply of land. So just in our neighborhood in the west, that's kind of, it could be up to almost 250 new homes, all created at point of need, where the community has opted into it and kind of drawn it in. There's a kind of additional kind of bonus as well in terms of freeing up homes that are underoccupied that could then also be released for additional families on Homes Choice. And I think it's kind of powerful taking this neighbourhood approach and this non-speculative, more opt-in development approach. You're almost beginning to house up to 1,000 people just in our neighbourhood. And if you're somewhere like Bristol, when you've got 20,000 people on the Homes Choice waiting list, this is obviously not the whole answer, but it is an additional additional way to deliver homes, which we think is quite exciting. So we've delivered a couple of homes like this, and so our kind of growth and replication challenge is like, how can we scale this and enable the tools that we've developed be available for other communities like us to adapt and adopt for their own needs. So, I've got to say, it's kind of this point about not treating homes just as a kind of financial product. We've also kind of calculated up the social value of the first 2 homes that we kind of developed. So this is the non-financial value of delivering homes. So things like carbon save, local jobs created, boost in health and kind of happiness. And it gives a really good return of £3,600 per square metre, which is a really good return on a capital investment and gives a much better return than the commercial market, where the social value return is generally around a third of this. So we've developed a toolkit of how we've kind of managed to unlock these types of site. This includes a land assembly model, a design code, a planning practice note, a funding model, a local lettings plan and nomination policy, which has been agreed by the housing regulator, and a localized system of how you can produce these homes, so development doesn't just wash through the community, but you can create local jobs as well. And so we've been kind of testing this model with lots of different communities, and it's fantastic that this Growth Lab has enabled us to do this. We've spoken to kind of 20+ communities across the UK, and it's really been a really valuable process to really test these ideas. And I think the kind of learning from this is that toolkits are not enough, and consultancy is not enough to spread good ideas. And it's also kind of trying not to turn this into a series of just projects, but trying to develop a kind of strategic capability to deliver these types of site. So what we kind of, in terms of our kind of replication strategy so far, we've got a great idea. We've done a system demonstrator in the real world. We've developed the toolkit, which is great. And now what we've been working through and what the Growth Lab has enabled us is to try and develop this service infrastructure for replication. And this has been the focus of our work in the Growth Lab. So we've kind of developed a strategy, and it's been fantastic to be in the Growth Lab because it's really helped us kind of clarify what our kind of offer is. And so the kind of basic kind of concept, what we want to do is to trial the approach in 3 neighbourhoods and work with 3 different local authorities in collaboration with a local community group who have a suitable neighbourhood. We then want to develop a set of what we call infill innovators. And these are modelled very much on the public practice model of putting kind of creative planners and placemakers embedded in local authority areas to increase capacity. So you would have an infill innovator in each of the recruited neighbourhoods, and that would be about building kind of capacity at that level. Those infill innovators will spend 80% of their time in place, on the ground, working with stakeholders, working with the planning authority, working with communities, and then they spend 20% of their time in a national network, so building up a kind of cohort and cadre of people really understanding, unlocking this type of site, and being able to access more collective forms of development finance and know-how about unlocking these sites. And then this is a kind of a strategy that can then almost kind of self-replicate within those local authority areas. So from our own case in Bristol, we've started our approach unlocking these microsites, focusing on our neighbourhood of Knoll West. And then just in this last month, the Bristol City Council has agreed to spread the approach to the whole of South Bristol. So then it enables us to work in other neighbourhoods, spreading, self-seeding this approach further. And we think that that kind of spreading of the strategy can also work in other kind of neighbourhoods. So yeah, that's just a little bit more detail on that. I think, recruiting those pilot neighbourhoods is very much about getting community and council working together and doing joint, we'd like to invite joint expressions of interests from people who are interested in this model. And it's really about, it's not a model that's going to be work everywhere. It's really about, okay, what's the type of suburban neighbourhood that could really work for this infill development? And it's also about really not kind of people working in isolation in kind of local areas, but really kind of creating that national network and that central kind of support and resources for these infill innovators. That's about access to funding, access to technical learning as well. So the next steps where we are at the moment. So we, as I mentioned, we're kind of modelling part of this growth and replication strategy on public practice and their very successful model that they've got. They're keen to diversify their model, and so focusing on this type of site of infill, suburban, micro and small sites. So we're doing a series of design sprints with public practice to develop the model further. We're really keen to develop this emerging model more with keen places, and I was delighted to see a few people on the call of places across the country that have already engaged with the model. That invitation is still open, so this sounds like something that could work for you. Get in touch. And then we're in the process of securing funding for a pilot version of this service infrastructure with what we hope will be 3 places to give it a really kind of good test run. So yeah, get in contact if you're interested in any of this. And then the team invited us just to sort of reflect a little bit on what we've learned from this kind of growth lab process, which first up, it's been a really valuable thing to be part of in terms of having a space to reflect, share with others and really kind of clarify the thinking. So it's been super helpful. And I think there's kind of 3 or 4 kind of key learning points from this. So the first is like community-led movement is a wonderful, diverse, fantastic space. And we're like proud to be part of that big movement. But I think we could always feel there was a general kind of pull for us to be a community-led housing enabler, like working across all sorts of diverse, wonderful kind of projects. And I think the discipline of this process was really about, right, we are super focused. We're not trying to do everything and help everyone. We are really focused on a particular typology of site, being small and microsites within suburban and urban areas, and being really focused on that's we're trying to unlock a type of site, and that's what we're really focused on. And I think the second learning point, we began this process really just focused on those back garden microsites, but testing with other communities. People were as interested in the kind of small sites, the infill sites, working with garage and car park sites. So we've integrated that offer, and we think that's much more powerful as well. The third one, which I kind of mentioned already, which is the real critical importance of kind of tying in council and community together and resourcing both. I think sometimes it's, resources go to councils or communities. So we really want to lock in, it's about both working together, because we absolutely believe that council and community working together means that you can do things that neither could do alone. So it is about doing the service infrastructure that locks in, working for mutual benefit of both of those things. And then the fourth point is about a learning point about kind of scale and this pressure that we all have as kind of community led to go big. You deliver 1 home or 2 homes and suddenly go, oh, well, can you do 300 now? And we're really trying to resist that. We do not want to become a developer like one of the other commercial volume house builders. And it's really about how we can scale in a distributed, networked way. And that's how we're trying to design that infrastructure so that we can use the tools that we've developed, and different communities with their different kind of needs and capabilities can take them and work them how they know how best to work them for their kind of context. So those are the kind of 4 things that we're really alive through our process. And I think that's it. There you go. And that's a nice picture, because that's how we imagine the world could be if we do manage to scale it.
Great. Melissa, if you could stop sharing now, and we'll go back to the main screen. And I think we've got just short of about 6 minutes to take questions. And I know you're going to be bombarded. So who would like to start? Or if Joseph, you picked anything up from the chat.
Yeah, Hilary Knight shared another question to contextualize and understand from high value Arundel. Has there been a lot of right to buy on the estate since the 1980s? I think specifically talking about the estate that you're
yeah, it's about 50-50 right to buy and 50% still owner occupied. I mean, what I think is interesting is that we've got families coming forward now who have done right to buy, and I kind of love this. It's like renationalisation of public assets, because they've reached a point in their lifetime when there's no way that they can fund their old age in a home that suits them, and their kids and grandkids have got no access to anything on kind of like the housing ladder. And so the way that if they can opt in for part of their garden to become part of this community land trust and get a secure affordable housing for themselves or a family member, then that's a powerful model. And I think that's incredibly exciting. I mean, that's really kind of completely new script about how we think about inheritance and how we kind of do housing and get secure housing, which I think is really exciting. But that's just emerging at the moment. So we've got a real ethos of everyone is invited and trying to be kind of tenure blind. We've managed to test it so far with council tenants, but absolutely want to make it accessible and workable for anyone.
Someone has also asked if you could tell them more about the small factory.
Yeah, our little factory is brilliant. So we can make as part of something called Norwest Media Centre, which is an art and tech arts collective, which has been around in the Norwest neighbourhood for about 20 years. And there's a makerspace in that that's got a kit of CNC machines and 3D printers and all sorts of things. And it is, again, like working with like, what assets have you got locally that you could use? And that CNC machine is able to make kind of like large Lego cassette style kind of that you can make homes from. So that's how we've explored, right, this is a type of housing that works for us. It's not about a developer coming in or a volumetric MMC kind of dropping stuff in and you have no idea what to do with it. It's about what can we make locally? And this is a kind of, within that community factory, we can do a scale of development that suits our community, which is exciting, because then we can do all the training and job creation, and all that value of development remains sticky to our community.
Yes. And someone's asked if the kits of timber parts meet London housing standards, do you know?
Yes, so so we're working at below 11 meters, and that enables you to use a lot more timber. So if you want a proper geek out on that, love to, and then get in touch. But yeah, we're absolutely working with that. We're working with War Thistleton, who are kind of specialists in timber, and they've done a pre-approved timber system above 6 stories, and then we're scaling this down to below 11 meters, which means kind of 3 or 4 stories max. You can use a lot more timber in terms of the planning and building control regs. And the point is to get pre-approval for that system so that it gets a much easier ride through planning and the build process.
Sanya has asked, what model did you use to calculate social impact value?
So we did a bit of pick and mix. We used TOMS and HACT. And what we did actually, we started with our community and did a whole kind of co-design exercise about what does good housing, what do good homes look like to you, what's important. And then the HACT thing is actually a pretty good a la carte menu of things like pride, reduction in loneliness or job creation. And they've been kind of financially validated as being things. So you can actually start with your community rather than what the council or anyone else is telling you what's important, and then put together your own kind of menu about what you want to count in social value. And if your revenue is below a certain level, it's free to access as well. It's a really good hack, that. So I highly recommend the hacked ones. They're much more humane and usable than the TOMS ones, which are a bit...
Do we have time for one more, do you think?
Yeah, everyone can use urban acupuncture, just credit, that's all. Free use, that's the rules of open source. Use and credit. Use, spread, credit.
Nice. And Sanya's asked if we can share the links, which perhaps we can do in a follow-up email to attendees.
That's great. So now if I can ask Alison and Steve from Middlemarch to share their presentation. And surprisingly, we're on time.
Thanks. So should be sharing that now. Can everybody see? Yeah. Thanks, Nicola. So bit of a different model that we're sharing with you now. So Middlemarch Community-Led Housing CIC is a social enterprise, and we're a support service for community land trusts. I'm here with Steve Watson, my co-director, and he's going to be talking in a minute. So I'm going to do the first few slides and then he'll do the next few. So we have a specialism in helping community land trusts to establish, shape up a housing scheme, and then partner with a housing association who will come along and fund, build and operate the homes. That's very simply what will happen. And this is where we work. We work throughout Dorset, Devon and Somerset. And these are all of our projects that have got to the stage of incorporation. The blue ones have completed their schemes and got people living in affordable homes in their communities, and the purple ones are in progress at the moment. And we were invited to apply to the Growth Lab because the partnership model between community land trusts and housing associations has been very popular in the Southwest, and it appears to be scalable if the same success factors are replicated elsewhere, and that's what we looked at in this piece of work. So this is broadly the model, just very basically, the community land trust shapes up a project and its housing association partner delivers it. The community land trust legally is the freeholder of the land and leads on choosing the site, and the housing association is a leaseholder. So the CLT is the landlord essentially, and the housing association owns the homes and is the tenant of the CLT. And one of the things that we think when we sat down to analyse it, one of the things that we think makes the community land trust and housing association partnership model work in the areas where we've seen good traction from communities and a great interest in communities for doing this is that communities seem to want it. So we didn't start off thinking that we would deliver housing association partnerships with community land trust, but when we examined what was going on for them, it seemed to be there seemed to be an insatiable demand for it. The second success factor that we think, our theory was that at the time of a lot of these projects getting going, there was a ready supply of pre-development funding and specialist technical support to encourage housing associations to partner with CLTs. So the pre-development funding, there was the Community Housing Fund up until recently, local authorities had funding, and there's been Homes England funding also for community land trusts that want to work up their schemes and lead on a project, and this was also encouragement for housing associations to get involved, and our role was to be that specialist technical support. The partnership model, it's been successful so far. It's provided 233 complete homes where the freeholds are owned by local CLTs. This particular one here was opened by the King a few years back, before he was the King. This is in Dorset, and it's a very rural community called Powerstock. Also in Dorset, this is Lyme Regis Community Land Trust who've completed their scheme. And here, this is in Devon, it's Christo Community Land Trust on the Dartmoor National Park. And this community particularly aspired to very high aesthetic environmental standards for their project. These homes are to Passive House standards. We've got plenty in the pipeline. There's 500 more homes in our pipeline at the minute in lots of iconic places, beautiful places like this here is Corfe Castle. And whoops. Go back. This here is Morto and Morecambe, a very popular place for going on holiday. And here is Salcombe, again, very high house prices, very popular place to have a holiday and a holiday home. So when we embarked on the research phase of the Growth Lab, we examined this question: why is there such strong demand from communities for these partnerships in the Southwest, and could this then apply elsewhere in the country? And to that end, we drew from 3 reports in the first part of the research. One was commissioned by regional housing associations in the Southwest and carried out by the University of the West of England. And one was commissioned by all the Devon housing authorities and carried out by us, Middlemarch, to find out what the barriers are to community land trusts in delivering affordable homes for local people. And the third one was on the impact of second homes and holiday homes, commissioned by the Local Government Association and carried out by Localis. So we investigated those, and what we broadly found was these 3 factors. So these 3 reports confirm what we already knew, was that in our area, affordability ratios are very high. It's very hard for people on ordinary wages to afford a home, both to buy and to rent. The incidence of second homes also really high. So these holiday homes, second homes, also impacting on the market. And there are a lot of protected landscapes. So this third map here. So areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks, areas where it's hard to develop housing, and all these things mean that development is expensive and challenging. These factors created an acute shortage of affordable homes across our area, with few or none being provided by housing associations and councils in a lot of communities. And we found that this was motivating communities to mobilise through setting up community land trusts. And so when thinking about those factors, we thought, well, where else, if we were looking at scaling up, growing this model, where else would have the same characteristics? And these are places that we found that had similar characteristics to Devon, Dorset and Somerset. So it's a list there of the local authorities that we identified, and we felt that community land trusts there were likely to form and likely to want to form partnerships with housing associations, as we found. I'm going to pass over to Steve now for the next few slides.
Thanks, Alison. So can you move it on to the next one, please? So the second half of our work with the Growth Lab was primary research, and we were aiming to answer this question: if there were to be a ready supply of pre-development funding and specialist technical support, would housing associations elsewhere be keen to partner with CLTs? So next slide, please. This chart here shows the housing associations that we've been partnering with over the last 10 years or so, by the number of homes in their stock holding. And as you can see, there's a real range of housing associations that get involved in these projects. In our area, ranging from White Horse, which only has 400 homes, to Sovereign, which is a much bigger landlord with 6,000 homes. And if you're wondering about the colour coding, it's because the smaller housing associations access capital grants through Homes England in a different way, on a scheme by scheme basis, whereas the larger ones, the green ones on this chart, already have contracts with Homes England, which means that they've got a ready supply of grant which they can bring to these projects. So that was the range of housing associations that we work with in our area, but we didn't have any relationship with housing associations elsewhere in the country. So what we did was ask Homes England if they could identify housing associations in other regions, which they thought would be keen on this model, and if they could also host some seminars with those housing associations so that we could explain the model to them and see what sort of appetite there was. So these slides you can see show the housing associations that were invited to the Midlands, the North and the South East. seminars that we had held by Homes England. And as you can see from those 3 slides, Homes England identified a very similar range of different sized and types of housing associations that they thought would be interested in this model. The feedback from those sessions was positive. So what we ended up with at the end of the Growth Lab process was a calculation for the cost of setting up these the right circumstances for CLT housing association partnerships. So as you can see from this summary, we took a period of 8 years and 30 projects providing 450 homes, and worked out that it would cost just over 5 million to fund the specialist services and the pre-development costs. And so if you set up 4 of those services, it would cost about 21 million. So the final slide, please. The benefits of being in the Growth Lab. Well, it has been a really, really interesting period for us. Capacity, it's meant that we've done something that we wouldn't have done before, because it's all been sort of extracurricular really to the support we provide for projects. In terms of strategy, it's made us think about the question of, if this model was to be scaled up across the country, would we want to be at the forefront of doing that? In other words, would we want to expand Middlemarch across the country, or would we want to support replicas of what we do elsewhere, perhaps built around some of the enabling services that already exist? So it made us think very deeply about that with our board. It led to a position of investment readiness. So we know how much funding it would take to, say, double our own capacity, as well as to set up new services. And as a sort of byproduct, I think it strengthened our shared purpose with the CLT network, because we saw a lot more of Tom and Owen and Nicola, and it was a really enjoyable process. And not least, it strengthened our relationship with Homes England, who facilitated these regional events because they felt that the model represented good practice when it came to, in particular, when it comes to providing homes in rural communities. So on reflection, it's been a thoroughly worthwhile process. And we'll hand back to you, Nicola.
Excellent. That leaves us with a good 8 minutes for questions and answers. Does anyone like to raise a hand or begin?
Trevor Cherrett has a hand up.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Hi, Steve. Good to see you. Just really a question. I mean, you're talking about duplication, so or rather, spreading the model, and whether you would want to spread yours or duplicate. What sort of capacity do you have at the moment? I have obviously a direct interest in this in Wiltshire. We've got a number that are, coming along and will soon be wanting support, and we've talked about bringing you in, so to speak. And so what kind of capacity? I mean, you're obviously doing a lot. What sort of capacity you've got looking forward?
Our capacity is starting to open up, Trevor, as a lot of projects come through the pipeline, having been stalled due to nutrient neutrality planning moratorium and the rising build costs through the pandemic and so on. So we're opening up some capacity now, and potentially we could reach into Wiltshire because it's right on the edge of our area. What we did decide, though, strategically with the board was that we wouldn't want to expand Middlemarch across the country. We believe in focusing on the communities, in our own patch. But we'd happily support and advise replica services in the other regions.
Okay, just a follow-up. I noticed Wiltshire wasn't on your list of other authorities. Is that you were looking at other local authorities with similar similar situations to the southwest. And I noticed
Yes.
Wiltshire wasn't in it, which seemed slightly odd.
Well, what we were doing there, as Alison said, was mapping high affordability ratios, high incidences of second homes, and protected landscapes to those those local authorities, in which they most intensively coincided. So that's not to say that there are other places where there wouldn't be a strong demand for CLTs. It's just that there are some places that pop out as hotspots, if you like.
Yeah, okay, because Wiltshire would score pretty high on those. As a matter of fact, and I noticed on your second homes issue, Wiltshire was selected by the government on second homes, which slightly surprised me actually. But and I noticed it wasn't on your map. Anyway, no need to get involved in that, but it was just interesting to see. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, or do we have anything in chat?
We've had a few in the chat, if you don't mind me going through them again. So we had a question from Fiona, which you might have just covered, Steve, which was, what criteria did you use for your list of likely authorities for this model?
Yeah, I think I just covered that one.
Okay, no apologies. We also had someone asking, saying it'd be interesting to know if there's a correlation between HA size and quality or quantity of partnership work. Anecdotally, we often think of smaller and more local or regional as being a slightly better fit.
Yeah, I think that would have been our thesis a few years ago, that the smaller housing associations would be the best fits. But in fact, the partner that we work with that does the most partnership projects is Asta, which has about 35,000 properties, and what we found is that there isn't any particular correlation other than the sort of cultural fit of the housing association and the concept of partnering with a CLT. What the partnership model does seem to do is bring the resources, or enable the resources, of larger housing associations to be brought into rural schemes. In other words, those large housing associations that wouldn't see themselves as rural specialists, but are willing to invest in rural projects if there's a CLT taking the lead. And so that's been a really interesting finding.
Thanks, Steve. Sarah asked, have you had any feedback from Homes England regarding the figures, especially around pre-development support?
Yeah, well, all I'd say is that Homes England have been fantastic in supporting schemes through this model. I think because they see it as a really effective way of providing rural housing when their own targets for rural housing fairly consistently struggle to be met, and hence their willingness to help us promote it across the country. Some of these schemes that we've been involved with have been very expensive. I mean, the latest one to go on site is in an AONB, or what's called the National Landscape now, and also in a green belt, the urban green belt around Bath and Bristol. And we're talking about costs of £4,000 a square metre, which is pretty eye-watering. But Homes England have supported those kind of costs, and actually originally through their own administered pre-development funding.
Trevor, was your question related to that?
Yeah, sorry to come back again. I just think about housing associations. So are you finding that they're still, pretty supportive? Because I was getting the impression that they, because of the way that their funding has been affected, that there was being tougher for them, or is it? Are you managing to get them on board?
I think their environment is tougher, Trevor, and I think that's one of the reasons why they look to the two things that we mentioned in the presentation, which is the CLT to fund pre-development costs, because that de-risks what are often seen as risky projects for housing associations. And they're also looking for specialist support services like ours, so that because I think what worries them is if they get too extensively involved in hand-holding and guidance for community groups. They're happy to provide the delivery and operational experience and the funding, but they don't want to do the sort of day-to-day hand-holding.
Yeah, okay, that's very helpful actually, because we can do some of that. Yeah. Thanks.
Right. But I have to wrap up the question and answers. It's really getting very busy in the chat. I'm just going to share screen. Yeah. Just some quick reflections. My first reflection is just to say it's been outstanding, sort of like working with these teams, and they really have done great progress. But some of the key reflections on outcomes so far. So we have now got 3 distinct replicable models that match key land markets across England and Wales. I think all 3 presentations have said strong connections made with the public sector through Homes England and the authorities and registered providers. We understand a lot more the levers and the barriers in the housing industry to partnering, leading on from the discussion we've just had. And there's been an upskilling in the organisations around business planning and how to engage with investors. So our learning is there is an appetite in our sector to develop and share replicable models. As has been reiterated in the chats and the questions, Homes England and authorities have been critical levers. We all hate the elephant in the room of funding, but we need to link more with other funding streams. The issue that possibly for some organisations their capacity could become problematic. We may need to look at developing larger structures to sort of like grow this across the country. And the question is, could the Growth Lab movement give organisations, or being part of the growth movement, give organisations confidence and sense of credibility when approaching sort of like the housing and finance industry? So it's just summing that up. And now we move to breakout rooms. In a moment, Josie is going to be putting you into your breakout rooms. Josie will remain on, so if you've got a problem, you can't get into your breakout room, or your internet drops out and you need to rejoin, Josie will be there to help you. And the question that we have, and that'll be in the chat as well, for your breakout rooms is, are there opportunities in your organisation, in your region, to replicate these models? Where are your options to replicate? So if I can stop sharing and hand back to Josie, who will see you all in your breakout rooms. Again, keep putting things on the Jamboard if you can. And the question, if you need to go back to it, will be in the chat. There we go. I hope that was, a really good exchange of thoughts, and that people have, come together, seen connections, see how they could work together. Hope that you put lots and lots of things on the Jamboard. I just want to pass over now to Tom for some closing thoughts, if you wouldn't mind, Tom.
Thanks, Nicola, and to everyone for your contributions today, especially the 3 teams for sharing all the work they've done through the pilot of this lab, and to Nicola for managing it, and Owen and Steve for putting in the bulk of the work in designing the programme. And it's been really interesting seeing some of the conversation. Hopefully we'll get some of the feedback from some of the other breakouts as well. We are hoping to build on this and repeat it. We are talking to at least one funder about trying to do another round of this, both to continue working with the 3 teams we've got and bring some new ones in. We are really open. If you've got suggestions of people we can collaborate with on this, if this has got your mind thinking about sort of propositions you could bring into this kind of a process, do get in touch with us through Nicola, and you can fill up her inbox with stuff. And yeah, we hope to keep plugging away at these ways of thinking about how we grow the sector and grow our impact. I think that'll do. It's probably too much noise behind me. You don't know how much you can hear, so I'll leave it there. Just hope you all have lovely days.